You're sitting in your favorite chair after a long day, scrolling through your phone. The hum of the refrigerator is the only sound. Peace, rare, quiet, and earned. Then you hear her voice, that specific tone. Not overtly angry, not entirely calm either, just sharp enough to make your chest tighten. Did you remember to take out the trash? It's not really a question. It's a psychological trigger disguised as domestic concern. And within seconds, the evening's peace dissolves into another exhausting argument about everything except the trash itself. If this feels familiar, it's because you've been here before, many times. That familiar surge of irritation, the defensiveness, the mental scramble to explain yourself. She's not really arguing about the garbage. She's reestablishing emotional control. You try to resolve it logically, walk right into the trap. Today, let's dissect how women manufacture conflict. Not because they're evil, but because the human psyche craves stimulation, validation, and control. Some do it consciously, others instinctively. But the outcome is the same. Your peace becomes collateral damage in a psychological tug-of-war. 1. The spark amplification loop. Most men assume big fights come from big problems. But the real damage in relationships starts with the small stuff. Micro-provocations that feel too minor to matter. A single spark that, when fanned skillfully, ignites into emotional wildfire. A sigh, a raised eyebrow. Nothing's wrong, said in a tone that means everything's wrong. This is spark amplification, the art of turning a small emotional charge into an explosive argument. The technique depends on emotional multiplication. A small irritation in you becomes a huge emotional wave in her, which triggers a bigger defensive response in you. And so the loop feeds itself until you're arguing about tone, attitude, or the meaning of a sentence that started as nothing. The loop works because men operate logically. You think you're solving a misunderstanding, but she's not solving, she's feeling. Every rational explanation you give fuels the emotional fire further, because now she can interpret your calmness as coldness, your explanation as evasion, your reasoning as dismissal. The only way out of the loop is not to enter it. Recognize the spark for what it is, a test, a probe, an emotional ping. It's not about trash, tone, or timing. It's about control. 2. Tone is a weapon. Language has two layers, the literal and the emotional. The literal says what you hear. The emotional tone says what you feel. Women who are emotionally intelligent or emotionally manipulative understand this instinctively. A simple "are you going out dressed like that?" can mean "I care," "I'm jealous," or "you embarrass me." The same words, different tone, entirely different psychological payloads. Tone weaponization works because it hides aggression inside plausible deniability. If you react, you seem hypersensitive. "I was just asking," she'll say. "Why are you overreacting?" That's the trap. You're now defending your emotions instead of addressing hers. To counter this, you must hear tone as data, not accusation. Don't fight tone. Label it internally. She's anxious. She's seeking validation. She's projecting frustration. Once you name it, you neutralize its sting. Respond to the content, not the emotional bait. 3. The thought-emotion chain. Every manipulation begins not with emotion, but with thought. Here's the sequence. She says something provocative. You think, "She's judging me." That thought creates emotion, irritation, guilt, defensiveness. Emotion drives action, justification, anger, retreat. Action provides her new material. See, you're being defensive, and the cycle continues. The key to breaking it lies between step 1 and step 2. Catch the thought before it grows roots. When you feel irritation rising, ask, what did I just tell myself about her words? Was it "she's attacking me"? Was it "I can't ever relax"? Challenge the thought, and the emotion loses its fuel. You can't stop her tone, but you can intercept your interpretation. That's where true control begins, not over her behavior, but over your own cognitive chain. 4. Emotional immunity training. You can't build emotional strength in a vacuum. You need resistance, pressure, to train your composure. That's why the universe keeps sending you the same argument in different costumes until you pass the test. Think of emotional manipulation as your gym. Each provocation is a weight. The heavier the weight, the stronger your stability can become. Every time you stay centered instead of reactive, you increase your emotional muscle memory. But training requires awareness. You must spot trigger thoughts early, those inner whispers like, I shouldn't have to deal with this. Here we go again. Why can't you just stop? Those thoughts feed impatience, and impatience feeds tone, and tone feeds conflict. Interrupt them. Replace them with grounded acceptance. This is my moment to train. I can choose calm. Her storm isn't my weather. You're not suppressing emotion. You're repurposing it, turning provocation into discipline. 5. The button catalog. Every man has buttons, emotional triggers that create predictable reactions. And every partner, consciously or not, becomes a cartographer of those buttons. She learns what words sting, what expressions silence you, what comparisons make you defensive. Once mapped, those buttons become instruments in the symphony of conflict. But the goal isn't to destroy the instrument. It's to become untunable. When she presses a button and nothing happens, the music stops. The performance ends. To do that, you must identify the belief under each button. I'm not good enough. I always mess things up. I'm being disrespected. Expose these beliefs to light, and they lose power. Once healed, the button dissolves. The next time she presses it, silence. 6. From victim to student. The moment you stop seeing manipulation as attack and start seeing it as feedback, you graduate to the next level of mastery. She isn't your enemy. She's your unwitting teacher. Each conflict shows you exactly where you still lack control, patience, or self-respect. When she succeeds in triggering you, respond internally with gratitude. Thank you for showing me where I'm still vulnerable. This isn't sarcasm, it's self-awareness. Gratitude disarms manipulation because it removes the expected emotional return. She pushes for fire. You offer stillness. You win not by domination, but by transformation. Every emotional jab becomes a lesson in strength. 7. The testing phase. When you finally stop reacting, don't expect peace immediately. Expect escalation. Manipulators test for weakness. When old tactics fail, they increase intensity, switch targets, or manufacture crises to confirm whether your calmness is genuine or temporary. But this testing isn't punishment, it's verification. The final exam of your psychological training. If you stay grounded through the escalation, she'll eventually realize her usual control methods don't work anymore. The dynamic shifts. Either the relationship matures into honesty, or it collapses because the fuel, drama, is gone. Both outcomes serve you. 8. The mastery stage. Mastery isn't cold detachment. It's controlled warmth, compassion without compliance. You recognize manipulation not as evil, but as fear. Fear of losing control, fear of disconnection, fear of not matching. You respond to the fear, not the performance. That's the highest level of immunity, transforming manipulation into understanding, conflict into clarity, emotional warfare into emotional leadership. You stop being reactive and start being magnetic, calm, grounded, untouchable. And paradoxically, that's what makes you most attractive. Because real strength doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It simply stands silent, aware, unmovable. 9. The psychology of manufactured chaos. Most men believe emotional chaos is accidental. It isn't. In dysfunctional dynamics, chaos is currency. The person who controls the chaos controls the connection. When the emotional temperature rises, the logical mind shuts down. In that fog, whoever maintains composure becomes the quiet architect of reality, but whoever creates the chaos becomes its dictator. She knows that if she can destabilize your emotional baseline, she can steer the direction of the entire interaction. This isn't always malicious. Often, it's instinctive. Emotional volatility becomes a form of communication. Conflict replaces intimacy when real vulnerability feels too risky. Arguing feels alive. Calmness feels distant. That's why she often provokes during peaceful moments, Because peace, to someone addicted to emotional stimulation, feels like rejection. When things get too calm, her subconscious searches for proof that the connection still exists. So she creates an emotional reaction, any reaction, to reassure herself that she still matters to you. But when you understand this dynamic, you no longer fall for the bait. You recognize her chaos as a search for connection, not a personal attack. And once you see it that way, you can respond not with irritation, but with quiet clarity. I can tell you want my attention, but this isn't the way to get it. You disarm chaos by naming its purpose. 10. The myth of understanding. Men often fall into what could be called the therapist trap. You believe that if you can just understand her, if you can trace her moods to childhood trauma, emotional needs, or attachment wounds, the behavior will stop. But understanding is not transformation. Understanding explains why the fire started. Transformation learns to stop standing in the flames. The truth is, insight doesn't change behavior, repetition does. Emotional patterns dissolve only when replaced by new ones practiced over time. You can't reason someone into emotional maturity. They must experience it through consistent boundaries. Every time you rationalize her disrespect or emotional volatility as she's been through a lot, you reinforce the idea that her wounds give her permission to hurt others. You cannot love someone into healing. You can only hold your own frame so strongly that they must choose between growth and losing access to your stability. So the question isn't, why is she like this, but why am I staying? Why do you keep tolerating behavior that drains your peace while calling it compassion? That's not empathy. That's addiction to potential. 11. The reality of emotional addiction. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Emotional manipulation thrives because men are addicted to the very drama they claim to hate. Each spike of anger, each argument, each tearful reconciliation releases a flood of dopamine, adrenaline, and oxytocin, the same neurochemical cocktail found in thrill seekers and gamblers. The brain mistakes volatility for passion. This is why calm relationships feel boring after toxic ones. Your nervous system has been conditioned to equate chaos with connection. Breaking that addiction requires withdrawal, silence, stability, and self-respect. And yes, withdrawal feels like emptiness at first because you're detoxing from emotional intensity. But on the other side of that stillness is something more powerful than drama. Peace that doesn't depend on someone else's mood. Real love feels safe, not stimulating. It brings quiet to your mind, not adrenaline to your bloodstream. 12. The illusion of progress. One of the most subtle traps in emotionally unbalanced relationships is the illusion of progress. After a major conflict, there's usually a calm phase, apologies, promises, maybe even moments of tenderness. You start to believe things are improving. But this piece is often just a reset period before the next escalation. This is the cycle. Tension explosion, reconciliation, honeymoon repeat. Each cycle deepens the emotional dependency. You tell yourself it's getting better, but what's really happening is the reinforcement of trauma bonding. The attachment formed not through consistent love, but through emotional highs and lows. Progress that depends on crisis isn't progress. It's survival. To break the illusion, measure your relationship by emotional consistency, not intensity. Ask yourself, are the calm periods growing longer? Are conflicts becoming shorter and more productive? Do both of you repair, or do you always lead the repair? If you're always the one doing the emotional labor, you're not in a partnership, you're in psychological management. 13. The discipline of emotional neutrality. Emotional neutrality doesn't mean apathy. It means responding without emotional contamination. Imagine standing in a storm. You don't fight the wind, you root your feet deeper. When she raises her voice, don't match her frequency. When she withdraws, don't chase. When she tests your boundaries, don't lecture, enforce quietly. The most unnerving thing to a manipulative person is someone who refuses to mirror chaos. You're not cold, you're centered. You make the storm visible by refusing to become part of it. This requires discipline, not detachment. It's the art of acting with full presence while withholding unnecessary emotional energy. You can care deeply without reacting intensely. That's true power, not dominance, not submission, but sovereignty over your own nervous system. 14. Gratitude as psychological judo. Here's one of the most counterintuitive yet effective techniques: gratitude. When someone successfully pushes your buttons, thank them, not sarcastically, but sincerely. I appreciate that. You just showed me I still have work to do. This simple acknowledgement reverses the manipulation dynamic completely. Instead of playing defense, you turn the moment into feedback. They expected anger, guilt, defensiveness, but instead, you show calm curiosity. You're not hurt, you're learning. This is psychological judo, using the attacker's force to build your own strength. But remember, gratitude only works if it's genuine. You must actually value emotional discomfort as training, not perform it as counterattack. Over time, gratitude rewires your relationship to conflict itself. You stop fearing provocation and start welcoming it as practice for mastery. 15. The final test, the silence phase. When you finally eliminate your emotional buttons, don't expect applause. Expect silence. Manipulators test one last time, not through shouting, but through absence. The silence phase. She withdraws attention, affection, validation, the very emotional currency she once weaponized. The goal is to make you chase again, to prove she still has influence. But when you can remain calm in that void, you've reached true independence. You've broken not only her pattern, but your own addiction to being emotionally fed by someone else's approval. The silence that once terrified you becomes sacred. You stop seeking peace from her and start generating it within yourself. That's the point of all this. Not revenge, not dominance, but self-governance. To no longer be ruled by moods, hers or yours. 16. From immunity to influence. Once you've mastered emotional regulation, something remarkable happens. Your presence begins to influence others without words. When you're calm, people around you subconsciously calibrate to your energy. Conversations slow down. Arguments dissolve faster. Even manipulative people instinctively soften because your stability removes the reward structure that fuels their behavior. You become the anchor in every room, the calm in every storm. This is why emotional mastery isn't just self-protection, it's leadership. The world gravitates toward people who remain grounded under pressure. In relationships, this translates to respect, not demanded, but earned through consistent serenity. You stop trying to win arguments and start setting emotional weather. 17. The art of non-participation. Every manipulation tactic depends on participation. If you refuse to play, the game collapses. You win not by out-arguing, but by not arguing. You win not by proving innocence, but by denying the frame where guilt exists. When she says, "You don't care anymore," you don't debate feelings. You calmly say, "I do care, but I won't fight to prove it." That's not avoidance. That's maturity. You're refusing to let emotion replace evidence. Non-participation is the invisible power of people who can't be manipulated. The conversation ends not in victory, but in peace. 18. The evolution of masculine calm. True masculine strength isn't about aggression or dominance. It's about grounded awareness. You become unshakable not by suppressing emotion, but by mastering it. Your calm isn't numbness. It's the result of discipline. When men cultivate this calm, they create relationships built on trust, not tension. Healthy women feel safe in your steadiness. Unhealthy ones lose interest because there's no chaos to feed on. This is how nature filters quality, not through words, but through energy. When you are calm, grounded, and clear, the world rearranges itself around your peace. 19. The final exam of emotional mastery. Here's a truth few men understand. When you start to evolve, the world tests your evolution. Always. You'll notice it first in your relationships, subtle provocations, strange coincidences, or sudden waves of emotional intensity right when you think you've outgrown them. That's not regression. It's verification. When your emotional buttons stop working, the system that depended on them will fight to confirm whether the change is real. She may raise her tone, dig into your past mistakes, or create scenarios that once triggered you. The universe, through her, is asking one question. Have you truly changed, or are you performing calmness until it's convenient? This is where most men fail. They mistake escalation for failure when it's actually proof of progress. Your composure is working. That's why the system is panicking. Stay centered. You're not being punished. You're being refined. The testing phase is where discipline matures into wisdom. If you pass, something incredible happens. Emotional manipulation stops because it no longer yields results. The game ends when you stop playing. 20. When drama dies. After immunity, the emotional landscape of your life changes completely. The silence that once felt empty now feels sacred. There's no yelling, no defensiveness, no adrenaline. Just quiet. At first, it might feel alien, too calm, too stable. You might even crave the old chaos because you once mistook intensity for love. But soon, you begin to appreciate the profound clarity that comes with peace. Conversations become cleaner, decisions simpler. Your energy stops bleeding into meaningless emotional skirmishes. You notice how much time and creativity were stolen by mental noise. When drama dies, what remains is reality. Reality is quiet, but it's powerful. It's where genuine love, creativity, and purpose live. And here's the paradox. Once you no longer need emotional stimulation, you finally become capable of authentic emotional connection. Because love without peace isn't love. It's dependency dressed in passion. 21. Transforming manipulation into mastery. At this stage, manipulation no longer feels like a threat. It feels like a mirror. You begin to see beyond behavior into intention. You notice that behind every manipulative act is a fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of insignificance, fear of losing control. When you meet fear with fearlessness, something shifts. The manipulator doesn't know what to do because the energy exchange has been inverted. You're no longer defending yourself from emotional chaos. You're witnessing it with compassion. The master doesn't punish immaturity. He exposes it gently through contrast. When she accuses you unfairly, you don't defend, you clarify. When she provokes, you don't retreat, you observe. When she withholds affection, you don't chase, you remain steady. That steadiness becomes the mirror in which her own emotions are reflected clearly. Some will mature in that mirror. Others will break it. Both outcomes are revelations, not losses. Emotional mastery doesn't just protect you. It transforms everyone around you who's ready for growth. 22. The power of psychological alchemy. Alchemy is the ancient art of transforming base metals into gold. Emotional alchemy is the art of transforming pain into wisdom. Every insult, every accusation, every unfair outburst contains raw material for transformation. If you react, the energy controls you. If you observe, the energy serves you. You begin to transmute irritation into insight, disrespect into detachment, chaos into calm. The more you practice this alchemy, the more your emotional world becomes unrecognizable from what it once was. You stop being the man who flinches at conflict and become the man who absorbs it, refines it, and releases clarity in its place. Where others see manipulation, you see feedback. Where others see enemies, you see teachers. That shift is the gold, emotional wealth that can't be taken, only cultivated. 23. Emotional sovereignty. The ultimate goal of this journey isn't to outsmart women, win arguments, or dominate relationships. It's sovereignty. Sovereignty means you own your emotional state completely. Nobody's tone, timing, or tactics can move you off center. You stop outsourcing peace. When you wake up, you decide your energy. When you speak, you decide your tone. When you're challenged, you decide your response. Nothing is involuntary anymore. This sovereignty doesn't make you rigid. It makes you reliable. And reliability is what makes both love and leadership possible. People trust calm men. They trust those who can walk through storms without shouting at the rain. That's what you're building, not walls, but grounded foundations. You're not emotionally unavailable. You're emotionally responsible. 24. Healthy women versus manipulative women. When you achieve emotional sovereignty, the type of women you attract changes dramatically. Manipulative women will quickly lose interest. They can't hook into your nervous system anymore. Your silence feels like rejection to them. Healthy women, however, find your presence magnetic. Your steadiness feels like safety, not control. Your calm invites authenticity because it doesn't demand performance. You'll start noticing how peace acts as a filter. It naturally separates those who crave connection from those who crave control. So you stop chasing. You start choosing. Peace becomes your sorting mechanism. 25. Beyond resistance, the gentle master. The highest form of strength is gentleness. When you no longer need to prove calmness, you simply are calm. You no longer try to stay composed. It's your default state. At this level, manipulation doesn't even register as offense. It registers as suffering. You see the other person's chaos as evidence of their inner pain. So you respond not with dominance, but with dignity. Not with pride, but with presence. You become a quiet teacher, not through lectures, but through energy. Your life itself becomes a lesson in emotional control, compassion, and maturity. You can still love deeply, laugh fully, and argue passionately, but none of it disturbs your inner stability. That's the paradox of mastery. The less you try to control others, the more influence you actually gain. 26. Emotional leadership. A man who masters emotional regulation becomes a leader, not just in relationships, but in life. Because leadership isn't about commanding others, it's about commanding yourself. In every social group, people subconsciously look for the person whose emotional state is the most stable, the one who doesn't panic, overreact, or spiral. That's the person everyone follows, whether they realize it or not. When you master your emotional climate, you become that person. You don't control people, you stabilize them. The world doesn't need more dominant men. It needs more grounded ones. 27. The philosophy of peace. After years of emotional turbulence, peace feels like a luxury. But once you taste it, it becomes the only standard you'll accept. Peace doesn't mean the absence of emotion. It means the absence of unnecessary reaction. You'll still feel anger, sadness, excitement, love, but those feelings won't hijack your behavior. They'll move through you without distorting who you are. This kind of peace is rare because it requires constant vigilance. You don't reach it once and stay there. You maintain it daily, like keeping a flame alive in the wind. But when peace becomes your home base, everything changes. You speak slower. You think clearer. You love wiser. And you finally realize most of your past suffering didn't come from what people did. It came from what you thought about what they did. Peace is perception, not permission. 28. The return to yourself. After the noise fades, you'll find something beautiful waiting underneath. Yourself, the version of you that existed before you were trained to react, defend, explain, and appease. That self doesn't need to win. It doesn't need to prove. It simply is. This is the full circle moment. You started this journey wanting to stop being manipulated. You and it realizing you were never truly controlled, only unaware. Awareness was the key the whole time. When you live from that awareness, no one can manufacture conflict inside you again. Because there's nothing left to manufacture, the factory is closed. You've reclaimed authorship of your emotional world. And that, in the truest sense, is freedom. 29. The quiet revolution. When one man learns emotional mastery, it affects everyone around him. His sons learn stability instead of suppression. His friends learn boundaries instead of burnout. His partners learn honesty instead of hysteria. This is how society changes, not through shouting, but through example. Every man who learns to master his own mind dismantles one small piece of emotional chaos in the world. This isn't just self-defense. It's evolution. 30. The closing truth. So the next time you're sitting peacefully after a long day, and she walks in with that familiar tone, remember, this isn't a test of her behavior. It's a test of your awareness. She's playing her part in your emotional education. And your task isn't to win the argument. It's to remain the witness. Because when you can stand in the middle of provocation and stay calm, you've already won something far greater than the argument. You've won yourself. And once you win yourself, no one can ever take you hostage again.